I woke up on the morning of my 69th birthday with the kind of quiet hope a mother carries even when she pretends she no longer expects anything. The sky over Kirkland was soft and pale, the kind that usually brings a calm day. And for a moment, I let myself believe this birthday would feel different from the last several lonely ones. I made my coffee the way I always did, strong and without sugar, and sat beside the small kitchen window that faced the street. Cars passed slowly. Someone walked a dog in a knitted sweater. Life felt normal, steady, predictable. Maybe that was why the disappointment hit harder a little later. I stared at my phone longer than I should have, the screen lighting up my face while I debated whether calling my son so early would make me seem needy. Andrew usually texted sometime around lunch on my birthdays, always quick and polite, sometimes even thoughtful. But it had been a long time since he'd made an effort to truly be present. I wanted to hear his voice today. I wanted him to remember without being prompted. But mothers do what mothers always do. So I called first. He picked up on the third ring. The background noise was faint, like he was already somewhere busy. "Hi, Mom. Happy birthday. I was going to call later." His tone was warm enough to soothe me for half a second, until I realized he sounded rushed, almost distracted. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. I was thinking, maybe tonight we could have dinner, just the two of us. It has been a while. There was a pause, the kind that has weight. "Mom, tonight might be tough. We have a leadership meeting at Northwest Capitol. It might run late. I don't think I'll be able to get away." I pressed the rim of my mug against my palm, feeling the heat sink into my skin. "Oh, I see." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Well, maybe this weekend then." "Sure," he said, already sounding relieved. "We'll figure something out. Love you, Mom." "Love you too," I replied, but he had already hung up. I sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me like dust. I had raised that man with every ounce of love a mother could give, and still his voice could slice through me in ways no strangers ever could. I reminded myself that he was busy, that his job was demanding, that he had a family of his own now. Mothers tell themselves these stories every day. Sometimes they even believe them. I got up from the kitchen table and rinsed my mug, trying not to let the sting linger. I wasn't going to let myself fall apart on my birthday. Not today. I showered, dried my hair, and put on a soft blue sweater. While I brushed out my curls, my phone buzzed. A message from Lily, my 15-year-old granddaughter. "Happy birthday. Grandma, I miss you. I hope today is special for you." The sweetness of it made my throat tighten. She was the one person in that house who never made me feel like an outsider. Just as I started typing a reply, another message came in from her, shorter this time, almost hesitant. "I hope tonight goes okay. I will try to send you a picture if I can." I stopped typing. A picture of what? The phrasing felt careful, like she wasn't supposed to say more. I called her, but it went to voicemail. That alone was unusual. Lily always picked up for me. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked into the living room, glancing around at the framed photos I had kept through decades of living. One of them showed Andrew at 8 years old, missing both front teeth, standing beside me at the Seattle Aquarium. His hand was clasped in mine. His smile was so genuine it hurt to look at it. How did a child with a smile like that grow into a man who could barely spare time for his mother on her birthday? I shook the thought off and tried to keep myself busy. When I finally sat down again, the urge to check social media crept over me. I wasn't very active on it, but I did sometimes scroll through to see what Lily was doing at school or what arts and crafts projects she was working on. I opened the app and typed my daughter-in-law's name into the search bar. Nothing. I blinked and tried again, still nothing. Haley had blocked me, and very recently, judging by how easily I found her account before, she had never been subtle with her disapproval of me, but blocking me on the morning of my birthday was cruel even for her. Just then, my phone buzzed again, a message from a number labeled doorman downstairs. It was Richard. "Mrs. Parker, I hope you're having a pleasant morning. Just wanted to let you know a package arrived. Also, I saw your son and his family leaving Bellevue early, dressed very nicely. Looks like they have a special evening planned." I froze. A special evening. Andrew had claimed he was stuck at a leadership meeting, but he was out somewhere with his wife and her mother, all dressed up. The lie wasn't just a lie anymore. It was intentional, precise, meant to keep me from asking questions. My birthday dinner hadn't conflicted with work. It had conflicted with something else entirely. I took a slow, steady breath and looked at my reflection in the darkened window. My eyes were not the eyes of a woman defeated. They were older, yes, but they were sharper too. I felt something shift inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet beginnings of resolve. I replied to Richard, thanking him, and walked back to my bedroom. If my son wasn't going to spend my birthday with me, then I would spend it with myself. I chose a simple navy dress that still made me feel elegant and slipped it over my shoulders. I fastened a delicate silver necklace Thomas had given me years before, when birthdays still came with surprises and warmth. I stood in front of the mirror one last time, took a deep breath, and picked up my purse. As I stepped into the hallway, I could feel the day shifting beneath my feet, like something was gathering momentum. I did not know what I would discover that evening or how deeply the truth would cut, but I knew I had to walk toward it. I left my apartment and made my way downstairs, feeling the cold air wrap around me as I stepped outside. The sky was dimming into early evening, its colors soft like brushed watercolor. I opened my phone to call a cab when another message from Lily appeared at the top of the screen. "Grandma, please don't be upset if tonight feels unfair. Some things are not in Dad's control." I stared at those words until the letters blurred. Somewhere inside that text was a truth I wasn't ready to face. Not yet, but I knew I would soon. I put the phone away, lifted my chin slightly, and waited for the cab. The night was just beginning, and I could feel the first crack in the world I thought I understood. The cab pulled up with its headlights glowing through the fading evening light, and I climbed inside, smoothing the skirt of my dress as the driver asked where to. I told him Riverside House and leaned back into the seat while the city slipped by outside the window. There was a stillness in me that felt strange, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air holds its breath. The driver was an older man with soft eyes who hummed along to a jazz station on the radio. After a few minutes, he glanced at me in the mirror and asked if I was celebrating something special tonight. I almost laughed. My birthday, if you can believe it. His eyebrows lifted, and he offered a gentle congratulations. I thanked him, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. We turned onto the main boulevard where the lights from the shops reflected off the wet pavement. I watched couples walking arm in arm and families shuffling out of restaurants. Each doorway we passed felt like an invitation into a life I did not have. The ache of that quiet truth pressed against my ribs. When we reached the restaurant, the driver wished me a lovely evening. I nodded, stepped out, and felt the cool air settle around my shoulders. The entrance was busy, customers filing in with the kind of warmth that belongs to people used to celebrating life together. I stood there for a moment, letting myself gather a breath before walking inside. The hostess smiled politely and asked for my reservation. She led me toward the dining room. the sound of soft music brushing the edges of my thoughts. As we passed a mirrored wall, I caught my own reflection. For a heartbeat, I did not recognize the woman looking back, her eyes too tired for a birthday night. I forced a small smile before turning away. The hostess guided me to a table near the center. I thanked her and sat down, arranging my napkin on my lap. Around me, conversations rose and fell, lighting soft ripples of laughter. I tried to let the atmosphere comfort me, but unease threaded through every breath I took. My phone buzzed again. For a moment I hesitated, afraid of what else I might see. But I opened the message. It was from Lily. Just be patient tonight. Dad did not choose any of this. I stared at those words until my chest tightened, the kind of fear only a mother knows, the one that whispers that your child is hurting in a place you cannot reach. Before I could respond, another notification appeared. It was an alert that someone had posted a photo nearby. It took only a second for my eyes to land on the familiar faces. Haley's public picture, the one clearly meant to be seen, even by those she usually tried to hide it from. Andrew, Haley, Marjorie, Lily, all smiling at a dinner table. The caption read, "Family dinner celebrating us," with a line of cheerful emojis. I felt a coldness spread through me so slowly, it almost numbed me. They were not at home. They were not at some private event. They were here, in this same restaurant, all dressed up, all together, and they had chosen to celebrate something without me, on a night they knew was mine. I put my phone face down on the table and closed my eyes. The waitress came by to take my order, but I barely managed to answer. She asked if I wanted a birthday dessert. I shook my head. "Just water for now, please." She nodded kindly before walking away. I opened my eyes when someone approached the table. It was Richard, the doorman from my building. "Mrs. Parker, I did not expect to see you here tonight." He smiled warmly, carrying a small package. "This was delivered to the building earlier. I thought you might want it." He lived only a block away and often stopped near the neighborhood restaurants after his shift. I thanked him softly. His presence steadied me in a way that surprised me. When he left, I opened the small box. It was a framed photo of Thomas and me from years ago. I had forgotten it was being restored. The corners were trimmed neatly, the colors sharpened. His eyes in that picture held the kind of warmth that made every day feel less lonely. I touched the glass gently, tracing the faint lines of his smile. "You would know what to say to me now." I whispered inside my own mind. "You always did." I slipped the frame back into the box just as my phone vibrated again. Another message from Lily. "Grandma, please do not be upset if you see us. I did not choose this." I could feel my pulse quicken as I typed. "Are you all here?" She replied almost instantly, "Yes, I am sorry." I took a breath and stood up. Something in me felt anchored, almost guided by instinct. I walked toward the back of the restaurant, past the softly lit tables, past couples leaning close. The air changed slightly near the private dining section, growing quieter, more insulated. A waiter pushed open a sliding door, and through that narrow gap I saw them, my family, or at least the people who were supposed to be. Andrew was turned slightly toward the wall, his shoulders tense. Haley was smiling too wide, too bright. Marjorie sat at the head of the table like she belonged there more than anyone else. Lily looked small beside them, lost but trying to stay brave. I stepped toward the doorway but stopped just short of entering. I watched, letting the scene settle beneath my skin. Haley leaned in toward Andrew, saying something I could not hear. He nodded stiffly, eyes lowered. He looked nothing like the boy in the aquarium photo. This man was worn thin, pulled in directions, that did not belong to him. My heart ached, but it also hardened. A movement caught my eye. Lily had noticed me. Her eyes widened, and she rose quietly from her seat. "Grandma," she said softly as she reached me, "I am so sorry. They made Dad stay. They said he had to." She looked back toward the table, then back at me with tears clinging to her lashes. He did not want to lie. I rested a hand on her shoulder. "It is all right, sweetheart. I am here now." Before she could answer, Marjorie's voice cut through the room. "Lily, sit back down." Her tone was sharp enough to slice the air. She finally noticed me standing at the doorway. Her expression shifted, annoyance tightening her features. "Evelyn, I had no idea you were here." Haley turned next, her smile faltering. Andrew slowly lifted his head and met my eyes. For a moment, everything softened. Then Haley placed a hand on his arm, and whatever courage he had in that moment vanished. I stepped a little farther into the room, and my voice stayed steady, even though my hands felt cold. I did not mean to interrupt. I wanted to wish my family a lovely evening. Marjorie gave a thin smile. "Sometimes families have events that do not require everyone to attend. I hope you understand." Lily let out a small breath that sounded like a protest, but I gently squeezed her shoulder, signaling her to stay quiet. I turned to Andrew. My son could not meet my gaze for more than a second. His guilt was a living thing in the space between us. "Dinner is lovely," I said. "Enjoy it." And I stepped back, letting the doorway frame me as I paused for one more heartbeat, letting the moment imprint itself. Then I turned and walked away, back toward my own table, toward the quiet and the truth I was finally ready to face. I walked back to my table and sat down slowly, not trusting my legs to hold me if I stayed standing any longer. The water the waitress had brought earlier was still there, small beads of condensation running down the glass. I took a sip even though my throat felt too tight to swallow. The sounds around me faded in and out, as if the whole room had shifted underwater. I kept my eyes on the table, afraid that if I looked anywhere else, I might fall apart. I did not expect the flood of emotions that came next. Hurt, yes, that had been simmering under my ribs all evening. But something heavier pressed against my chest now, a kind of hollow acceptance that what I had just seen was not a misunderstanding or a simple oversight. It was deliberate, calculated. I had been erased. The waitress returned with a warm smile that faded slightly when she saw my expression. "Are you ready to order something?" "Ma'am." Her voice was gentle. I nodded, though the thought of food turned my stomach. "Just the salmon, please. And a glass of white wine." She touched my shoulder lightly before leaving, a small gesture that almost made my eyes burn again. I needed something to anchor me, so I reached for my phone. I hesitated before turning it over, afraid of more pictures, more proof of how little space I occupied in the world of my son. But the screen was blank, except for a single message from Lily that had come through while I was walking away. "Grandma, I tried to talk to them. Please do not think Dad wanted this." I stared at the words until the letters blurred. Sweet, loyal Lily. She was caught between worlds she had never asked for. I typed back, "Thank you for telling me. I am all right. Enjoy your evening." A lie, but lies can sometimes be kindness when spoken to someone who is not at fault. The wine arrived. I wrapped my hands around the stem of the glass, letting its coolness steady me. I tried to breathe, to settle the storm inside me long enough to understand what I was really feeling. Betrayal, yes, but beneath it something deeper, a quiet, growing clarity. Before that clarity could take full shape, my phone buzzed again. A notification from the same account that had posted the photo, Another picture had gone up. I could see it in the preview, even without opening it. The four of them raising their glasses again, this time with the caption, "A perfect family night." Perfect. The word cut sharper than any insult could have. I opened the picture to look at it more closely. Haley leaned into Andrew with a triumphant smile. Marjorie sat upright with that polished confidence she wore like perfume. Lily tried her best to smile, but her eyes betrayed the truth. And Andrew, my own son. He looked tired, stiff, as if the happiness in the photo had been painted on him rather than coming from anything real. I set the phone down and placed both hands flat on the table, grounding myself. Something inside me shifted again, but this time it felt stronger. Not sadness, but resolve. I had spent years stepping carefully around their lives, making myself small so they would not feel crowded by me. I had tried to be understanding, patient, generous. I had excused cold shoulders, late returns, missed holidays, forgotten birthdays. I had told myself he was busy, he was tired, he had responsibilities, that I should not expect too much. But tonight, in the face of everything, I realized something simple and painful. They did not diminish me because they were overwhelmed or distracted. They diminished me because they believed they could. They believed I would continue shrinking to fit whatever space they offered. The wine warmed me enough to breathe through the ache and sit upright again. I looked at the small dining candle flickering in front of me and felt the calm steadiness that comes before a decision. I was done shrinking. A soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Mrs. Parker, are you all right?" It was Michael, the manager. He had a look on his face that suggested he already knew the answer. I tried to smile. "Yes, thank you. Just taking a moment." His eyes flicked subtly toward the private dining section, then back to me. He had been working here long enough to read a room. "If you need anything, let us know. And may I say, you look lovely tonight. I hope the rest of your birthday brings you something good." There was such kindness in his tone that for a moment my composure wavered. But I nodded and thanked him, grateful for the dignity his words offered me. After he left, my meal arrived. The smell of lemon butter should have been comforting, but I could barely taste the first bite. I chewed and swallowed mechanically, my mind drifting. I reached for the framed photo of Thomas again, still tucked in its small box. I laid it on the table beside my plate and studied his face. "You would get up from this table and walk out of here with your head high," I thought, "and you would tell me to do the same." I finished the wine in slow sips. The restaurant was filling up more by the minute, and new voices joined the symphony of conversation around me. I closed the photo and slipped it back into my purse. My heart steadied. I typed a brief message to Lily. "I saw the picture. I hope you are doing all right." She replied quickly, "I'm sorry, Grandma. I wish things were different." So did I, more deeply than she would ever know. But wishing had never changed anything in my life. Action had. I looked around the room once more, then signaled for the check. When it arrived, I paid quietly and thanked the staff. I stood, smoothing my dress, feeling the weight of the evening settle in my bones, but not in a way that weakened me. I walked outside into the cool night air. The sky had darkened into a deep shade of blue, and the street glowed with the shimmer of passing headlights. People talked and laughed as they walked past me. Some carried gift bags. Others held hands. Life continued in its ordinary, indifferent way. I stood still for a moment and closed my eyes. The wind brushed my cheek with the faint scent of the lake. Something inside me felt both broken and sharpened at once. I had hit some kind of threshold, a point beyond which I could not return to who I had been earlier that day. My phone buzzed again. A final message from Lily before she went back to the table. "Grandma, please go home and rest. Dad will call you tomorrow. We will make it up to you." I stared at the words, feeling a strange calm spread through me. Make it up to me. I had spent too many years accepting promises like that. Too many years waiting for change that never came. I typed only a few words. "Good night, sweetheart." Then I slipped the phone into my purse. A cab pulled up near the curb. I stepped toward it slowly, but before opening the door, I turned back to the restaurant. Through the window, I could see the faint outline of the private room. Their silhouettes moved as they talked and laughed, as if nothing in the world was amiss. My birthday had been erased from their night, but something new had awakened in mine. I got into the cab and closed the door gently, not with defeat, but with the quiet resolve of someone who finally understood what she had to reclaim. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I watched the lights of Riverside House shrink behind me, feeling the weight of the evening settle, not as sorrow but as direction. By the time we turned onto the main road, I knew with unsettling clarity that this night was only the beginning of something much larger. The cab ride home slipped by in a quiet blur, the streetlights stretching into long streaks of pale gold across the windows. When I finally stepped out in front of my building, the air felt colder than it had earlier, sharper somehow, as if the night itself had stiffened around me. I walked slowly through the lobby, nodding at Richard, who was finishing his shift. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to ask how my dinner had gone, but one look at my face made him stop. I gave him a small smile so he would not worry, and pressed the elevator button with a calmness I did not truly feel. Inside my apartment, the silence greeted me with an almost physical weight. I slipped off my shoes, draped my coat over the back of a chair, and stood in the middle of my living room, unsure of what to do next. I felt as if I had stepped out of one world and into another, a world where I could no longer ignore the truth even if I tried. I walked to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and took a slow sip. My hands trembled just enough that I set the glass down before it spilled. For a moment, I allowed myself to sit on the couch, just breathing. The framed photograph of Thomas I had brought home from the restaurant lay inside my purse, but I did not take it out yet. His face, even in memory, softened me too easily, and softness was not what I needed right now, not after what I had seen, not after hearing Lily's frightened voice trying to explain a situation she had never asked to be part of. I stood again and walked to my small desk near the window, turning on the lamp. The warm light flooded the space gently, casting golden edges over the stack of financial folders and documents I kept neatly organized. Most people my age stored recipes or craft magazines in old desk drawers. Mine held account statements, investment spreadsheets, legal documents, and lists of passwords I had memorized long ago. The world had changed after Thomas died in 2017, and I had realized quickly that I needed to understand money in ways I never had before. Andrew had offered to manage things for me, but something in me resisted handing everything over. A quiet caution, perhaps. A voice Thomas used to joke about when he said I had instincts sharper than any banker he had ever worked with. I reached for my laptop, opened it, and entered the passcode. The glow of the screen felt grounding. I navigated to the portfolio overview I updated every few months. The numbers were familiar, almost comforting. Years of careful learning and cautious investing had built something solid, something mine. I reviewed my holdings in Amazon, Costco, Starbucks, and a collection of steady index funds. The total amount sat at just under $1.8 million, a number that still surprised me when I saw it written out. Andrew thought he managed my finances. He thought the accounts with his name added were signs of trust, but those accounts had always been structured in a way that gave me final authority. I had never surrendered ownership, no matter how many times he had gently suggested it would make things easier for me. Tonight I finally understood why that small voice in me had insisted on caution. I clicked into the shared account, scanning the transactions Andrew had authorized over the past few years. Renovations for Haley's boutique, payments to consultants I did not recognize, a down payment on a luxury car Andrew had claimed was necessary to maintain a professional image at the bank. I felt my jaw tighten. I had trusted him to make choices that protected our family. Instead, I saw choices that protected theirs. A notification blinked at the top of the screen. It came from an older email account that Thomas had created for us before he passed. I rarely used it except for archived documents. The notification indicated a new message had arrived earlier in the day. I clicked it open without expecting much. What I found was a forwarded document from Andrew. He must have sent it automatically to his own synced folders, not realizing it would route to the shared archive. The document was a draft proposal prepared by Haley. It outlined an amendment to their marital property agreement. The language was polished and strategic. It emphasized merging their assets to honor long-term goals and included a section describing how elderly family members should gradually shift ownership to the next generation for efficiency. Elderly family members, efficiency, shift ownership. What caught my breath was a comment bubble Haley had left at the end of the proposal. It read, "If Andrew keeps depending on his mother emotionally or financially, this plan will not be secure. We need him to transition fully. Marjorie agrees this is necessary. Transition fully." The implication landed like a stone. I leaned back in my chair and let the truth settle. They had not just excluded me from a dinner. They were crafting a future where I did not exist in any meaningful way. A future in which my presence was an obstacle, a liability, something to be managed and eventually removed. Something inside me clicked into place. Not anger exactly, not yet. More like a clarity I had not felt in years. I opened a drawer and retrieved a thin folder labeled legal. Inside were the documents related to the estate Thomas had left behind. I unfolded the will, letting my fingers trace the familiar signature at the bottom. I skimmed through the pages until I found the clause our attorney, Robert Whitman, had insisted on including. The clause that protected me in ways I had not fully appreciated until now. Andrew would inherit only if he demonstrated consistent respect and independence from external pressures that could compromise the estate. At the time, I had thought it unnecessary, almost insulting, to imagine my son being influenced by anyone. But Robert had insisted that it was standard practice, particularly when family dynamics involve strong personalities like Marjorie. Tonight I could almost hear Robert saying, "I told you someday this might matter." I closed the folder and set it aside. My laptop screen dimmed slightly, awaiting input. I reached forward and clicked into the banking administration panel. A line of text appeared offering various security options. One of them allowed temporary suspension of authorized users. The cursor hovered there for a moment while I breathed slowly and deliberately. My heart beat steadily, not with impulsive fury, but with calm purpose. I clicked the option and typed my password. Then another screen appeared, asking to confirm whether I wanted to suspend access for Andrew Parker. My finger rested on the trackpad. Not yet. I whispered it aloud without meaning to. Not yet, because this decision required more than emotion. It required precision, timing, understanding. I exited the panel, closing it gently like closing the door to a room I knew I would return to soon. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the lights of the city shimmered across Lake Washington like scattered stars. Cars traced small rivers of movement along the distant bridge. I rested a hand against the cool glass and let myself breathe. I was not the woman they thought they could erase. I had lived long enough and lost enough to know how to stand alone. I had loved enough to know when to hold on and when to let go. And tonight, something had shifted inside me in a way that could not be undone. I stepped away from the window, turned off the lamp, and let the quiet of the room embrace me. My birthday had ended with a truth I could no longer ignore, and while I did not yet know what the next day would bring, I felt certain of one thing. I would no longer let others decide my place in this family or my worth. The night settled around me as I walked slowly toward my bedroom, already sensing that the morning would carry its own revelations. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds earlier than I expected, warming the edge of my pillow and pulling me out of a sleep that had been shallow at best. I opened my eyes slowly, letting the stillness of the room settle around me. For a moment I lay there, caught between the residue of last night and the sharp clarity that had followed me into my dreams. My birthday was over. Whatever tenderness I had hoped for had not come. What remained was a quiet determination that felt like a new part of me. I rose from bed, wrapped myself in a soft robe, and walked into the kitchen. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of the jasmine candle I had burned before sleeping. I filled the kettle and waited while the water warmed. My hands curled around the counter for steadying. While the kettle hummed, I looked out the window at the neighborhood slowly waking. A man jogged past with his dog, both moving with a purpose I envied. A woman carried a tray of coffee cups to her car. Life went on, steady and indifferent. I poured the water over my tea bag and sat at the dining table. My laptop waited on the desk, closed but not forgotten. The weight of everything I had discovered last night pressed lightly against my ribs. No longer shocking but grounding. Thomas had always said that knowing the truth, even when painful, was better than walking blind. I had a long day ahead. I returned to my desk, opened the laptop, and let the screen brighten the quiet room. The portfolio dashboard appeared immediately, rows of numbers and graphs that felt familiar, almost reassuring. I clicked through each account, reviewing balances and recent activity with a clarity I had not expected to feel this morning. While I worked, I found myself remembering the years after Thomas passed. The silence of the house had been overwhelming then, a kind of emptiness that settled into every corner. Andrew had stopped by often at first, concerned and gentle, offering to take care of the finances so I would not have to learn something so complicated at my age. At the time, it had sounded like love, but something inside me had resisted handing over everything. Perhaps it was pride, or maybe caution, born from losing the one person who had always understood money far better than I ever did. I had walked into the downtown library one afternoon in 2018, hoping to distract myself, and found a book someone had left on a table, Finance for Independent Women. I had picked it up without thinking, and by the time I finished the first chapter, something had awakened in me, a sense of control I had thought was lost. I checked out the book, then the next, and the one after that. Eventually, I began watching videos, attending free workshops at the community center, even taking a few online classes when I felt brave enough. Little by little, I built knowledge, and little by little, I built confidence. I opened another tab, reviewing the records of the accounts Andrew believed he managed. He had access, but I held ownership. Every signature, every authorization, every password was mine. Thomas had insisted on it before he died, telling me in a quiet moment that he wanted me to keep the reins as long as I could. He had known me well enough to see the strength I did not fully believe I had. My eyes paused on a set of transactions from the last 2 years. Renovations for Haley's boutique. Payments labeled business consulting that I knew had nothing to do with me. A few larger transfers that Andrew had described vaguely as investments with long-term payoff. But looking at them now, I saw something else. Choices made with the assumption that my wealth was theirs to shape. The discovery no longer shocked me. It simply clarified what I needed to do next. I opened the folder of documents Thomas had left in my care. His handwriting was still sharp and steady on the margins, small notes written for me to understand. I reread the clause outlining Andrew's inheritance, the one hinging on respect and freedom from outside influence. When Robert had suggested adding it, I remembered feeling embarrassed, like we were accusing our son of something he would never do. But Robert had insisted, calling it a protective measure. Nothing more. Now I understood the wisdom in it. I heard the subtle buzz of my phone on the counter. When I walked over, I saw Andrew's name on the screen. My pulse quickened, but I let it ring until it went silent. I was not ready to speak with him. Not yet. Not while my thoughts still needed shaping. A second call came from him almost immediately, then a third. I did not answer. If he wanted to talk about last night, he could wait. When the phone finally stilled, I returned to my laptop and opened the banking administration panel again. The same options appeared: suspend access, adjust permissions, freeze activity. The cursor blinked at me as if urging a decision. I imagined the way Andrew had looked last night when he could not meet my eyes. Shame, hesitation, fear. But none of those things changed what was happening behind the scenes with Haley and Marjorie. I closed the window gently. Not yet. It was not hesitation. It was strategy. I needed counsel, someone who knew the law and the nuances of estate planning better than I did. I picked up the phone and called Robert Whitman. His assistant answered and told me he had an opening later that morning. I agreed instantly, grateful I would not have to wait until another day. When I hung up, I exhaled slowly, feeling the first wave of certainty take shape. I dressed in a crisp blouse and a navy cardigan, gathered the important documents into a neat folder, and slipped everything into my purse. Before leaving, I paused at the framed photo of Thomas I had set on the coffee table. His smile, still full of warmth and mischief, even after all these years, steadied me. Guide me today, I murmured inside my thoughts, not expecting any answer beyond the quiet reassurance of remembering who he had been. Outside, the air carried the coolness of early spring. I walked down the steps of my building with a sense of purpose I had not felt in a long time. The cab ride to Robert's office took only 15 minutes, giving me just enough time to sift through my thoughts without drowning in them. When I stepped into the reception area, his assistant greeted me warmly and asked me to wait a moment. I sat in a leather chair, smoothing the edge of my folder while the clock on the wall ticked softly. A few minutes later, Robert opened the door to his office and smiled gently when he saw me. "Evelyn, come in. It has been too long." His voice carried the kind of steady calm that made me feel instantly grounded. I walked into the office, surrounded by shelves lined with law books and framed photos of his family. The scent of polished wood and old paper lingered in the air. He gestured toward a chair across from his desk, and I sat down, resting the folder in my lap. He studied my face for a moment. "Something tells me this is not a casual visit." I nodded, unable to soften the truth. Last night was my birthday, and something happened that made everything clear in ways I did not expect. I told him, carefully and steadily, what I had seen. The dinner, the picture, the secrecy, the proposal drafted by Haley, the clause Thomas had left in the will. I explained how long I had been watching the gradual shift in Andrew's behavior, the increasing influence of his wife and mother-in-law, and the pressure they were placing on him to distance himself from me. Robert listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands, thinking. "I see," he said slowly, "and you are ready to make changes." "Yes," I said, "I am." He nodded and reached for a set of documents already sitting on his desk. "Then let us begin." As we started reviewing the options, weighing what I could change and what I should protect, I felt something inside me settle into place. Whatever came next would change everything, but it would be on my terms now. By the time we concluded, the morning sun had shifted across the room, casting a bright line of light across the rug. I gathered my papers, thanked Robert for his guidance, and walked out of his office with a sense of calm strength, the kind of strength that comes not from victory, but from clarity. Outside, the city moved around me, unaware that something had shifted inside a woman they would never know. I paused on the sidewalk, letting the breeze brush my face, feeling the weight of the next step taking shape. I was no longer walking away from anything. I was walking towards something. I held my purse a little tighter as I stepped out of Robert's building. The late morning sun spreading over the sidewalks in warm streaks. Cars rolled by with steady hums, and people hurried across crosswalks carrying coffee cups or briefcases. To anyone watching, I must have looked like any older woman running errands in the city, but inside me something had shifted so completely that I barely recognized myself. I took a slow breath, letting the cool air steady me. Then I walked toward the corner where a line of taxis waited. The driver nodded as I got in and asked where to. I told him to take me downtown, not back home. And for the first time since yesterday morning, I felt a strange sense of control settle into my bones. The ride was quiet. I watched the buildings pass by, the glass windows glinting in the sunlight, and thought about Thomas. He had always believed in careful planning, in being prepared for any situation, even if it meant thinking ahead in ways that seemed overly cautious. I used to tease him for it. Now I saw how wise he had been. When the cab stopped in front of the sleek tower that housed Northwest Capital, I hesitated for just a moment before stepping out. This was where Andrew had built his career, a place that had shaped him, rewarded him, worn him down. I had not walked through these doors in years, but today was not about sentiment or even about Andrew. It was about ensuring my future remained mine. Inside, the marble floor gleamed beneath the lights. The reception area was polished and quiet. A young woman at the front desk looked up with a bright professional smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" I returned the smile politely. "I have an appointment with Mr. August Stone." Her eyes widened just slightly, the kind of reaction that comes when someone realizes the visitor carries unexpected weight. "Of course," she said quickly. "Let me check." Within seconds, she was on the phone. Then she nodded and gestured toward the seating area. "He will be right out to meet you." I sat on one of the leather chairs, smoothing my skirt with steady hands. I expected to feel nervous, but instead a calm steadiness filled me, the kind that comes from knowing you are doing exactly what you need to do. A few moments later, the glass doors near the elevators opened and August Stone stepped out. He looked older than I remembered from years ago, his hair silvering at the temples, but his posture was still confident. When his eyes landed on me, genuine warmth softened his expression. "Evelyn Parker, this is a surprise." He reached out and shook my hand, both of his covering mine briefly. "Come with me. Let us talk in my office." As we walked through the open floor, employees glanced up, curious. August was the chief financial officer of the entire bank, and it was not common for him to personally escort visitors. We stepped into an elevator, and he pressed the button for the top floor. When the doors closed, he let out a breath. "It has been too long. How are you?" I looked at his reflection in the polished metal. "I am well enough. Yesterday was my birthday." "Actually," he smiled, "happy birthday, though I have a feeling your visit today is not because of a celebration." "You are right," I said quietly. His office had a wide view of the water, the early spring light dancing across the surface. He gestured for me to sit at a small round table rather than the formal desk. I appreciated that. It felt less like a meeting and more like a conversation between people who mattered to each other. "Now tell me what brings you here," he said gently. I took a breath and began. I told him about last night, about the dinner I had not been invited to, about the photo posted publicly, about the words Marjorie had said. I told him about the proposal Haley had drafted and the pressure she and her mother were placing on Andrew. I told him about the transactional decisions made under my name without my genuine approval. Through it all, August listened with a stillness that reminded me of Thomas. When I finished, he leaned back and let out a long, slow exhale. I always respected Andrew's ambition. He began carefully, but I also knew that his personal life carried influences that worried me. What you are describing is more serious than I expected. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder Robert had helped prepare. Inside were the restructuring plans, the legal summaries, and the documentation confirming my ownership of the accounts. I laid them gently on the table. "I need your help with something." I said, "I want to make changes that protect my assets, legal changes, transfer changes, and I want to ensure that Andrew cannot misuse what does not belong to him." August opened the folder and scanned the pages with practiced eyes. After a few minutes, he nodded slowly. "Everything here is clean," he said. "You have more control than Andrew likely realizes. And these changes you seek are fully within your rights." A knot in my chest loosened slightly. "Thank you. But there is something more," he continued. "Something you should know as a senior manager at Northwest Capital. Andrew is held to a strict standard regarding ethical conduct and transparency. If his personal decisions begin to affect the bank's perception of his reliability, it could jeopardize his standing." I felt a pang of concern. "I do not want to ruin his career, Gus." "I know," he said, "but the truth is important. If Andrew is allowing others to influence decisions related to your finances, the bank must assess whether he can handle responsibility objectively." His words hung between us, heavy but undeniable. I folded my hands in my lap. Then I need to give him a chance to face the truth, but I also need to protect myself. August nodded in agreement. "I will help you implement these changes. Consider your accounts secured. And Evelyn, for what it is worth, Thomas would be proud of the way you are handling this." The sound of my late husband's name spoken so gently made my eyes sting. I had not realized how much I needed to hear that. "Thank you," I whispered. We stood, shook hands again, and he promised to follow up within the day with confirmations. As he walked me back to the elevator, he paused. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "if Andrew reaches out, let him come to you honestly. Sometimes the fall is what makes a man see where he went wrong." I nodded slowly. I understood. When I stepped out of the building, the wind had picked up, brushing loose strands of hair across my forehead. I tucked them behind my ear and inhaled deeply. The scent of the lake drifted faintly on the air, mixed with something like cedar. It calmed me. I started down the sidewalk, my steps steady, my purse secure under my arm. Cars zipped past, buses hissed to a stop, and the city moved with the rhythm of people carrying on with their ordinary lives. None of them knew that mine had shifted in ways I could not yet fully measure. At the corner, I paused, letting the traffic light cycle through its colors. A question rose in me, quiet but clear. Was I fully ready for the effects of the steps I had taken today? The light turned green. I crossed. The wind pressed softly against my back, as if urging me forward. And for the first time since yesterday afternoon, I felt a sense of steady belonging in my own life. Something had been reclaimed, something that had always been mine, but had gone dormant for too long. I reached the other side of the street and stopped, letting the certainty settle. This was only the beginning. I walked a few more blocks before calling a cab, letting the cold spring breeze clear my thoughts. By the time I reached home, the decisions I had made that morning settled inside me like stones placed one by one into a foundation, solid, unshakable, necessary. I placed my purse on the small table by the door and barely had time to take off my cardigan before my phone rang. When I saw Andrew's name appear again, my stomach tightened. I stared at the screen until the call faded into silence. A moment later, a message appeared. "Mom, we need to talk, please." I turned the phone face down without replying. "Not yet." I warmed a bowl of soup I had made earlier in the week and forced myself to eat a few bites. The food tasted dull, not because it lacked flavor, but because my mind was already moving ahead to the afternoon. If everything went according to plan, I would be meeting with August again later in the day. He had promised to call with the confirmation, but I suspected he also wanted me present when he spoke with Andrew. The thought unsettled me and steadied me at the same time. Around 1:30, my phone buzzed. It was a text from August. "If you are able, I would like you to come to the office at 3. There are details best discussed in person." It was not a request so much as an invitation to witness something important. I replied that I would be there. I spent the next hour preparing the documents I might need, making sure everything was in order. Every paper Robert had signed, every summary of assets, every clause from Thomas's will. I had always been someone who organized her drawers, who labeled her winter boxes, who made lists before grocery shopping. Today, that part of me felt like a strength rather than a habit. At 2:45, I requested a ride, smoothed my hair in the hallway mirror, and headed out again. The lobby felt brighter this time, filled with the mid-afternoon light pouring through the tall windows. I stepped outside and climbed into the cab waiting at the curb. My driver did not say much, but I was grateful for the silence. I needed the quiet to steady my breathing. When the cab pulled up to the front of the building again, a familiar swirl of nerves and resolve spread through me. I walked inside and headed to the reception desk. The young woman recognized me instantly. "Mr. Stone said you may go right up. Just take elevator 3. It is waiting for you." The elevator doors slid open as I approached, as if someone had timed it precisely. When I stepped inside, my reflection stared back at me from the polished metal. I looked composed, older, yes, but composed, stronger than I would have expected myself to be. As the doors opened onto the executive floor, August was already standing there. He gestured for me to follow him down the hall. "I appreciate you coming," he said as we walked. "We have made progress on securing your accounts, but there are matters involving Andrew that need to be addressed carefully." I nodded. "I understand." He led me into a conference room with wide glass walls overlooking the city. A long table stretched across the center, its surface gleaming. Only 2 chairs were pulled out, one on each side. Papers lay neatly arranged in front of August's seat. He motioned for me to sit while he stood by the window, checking his watch. "He will be here shortly," he said. My heart thudded once, sharply. Andrew had been summoned, not by me, but by the institution that paid him, evaluated him, judged him. That fact alone stirred something complicated inside me, a mix of sorrow and inevitability. We waited in silence for a few minutes until the door opened abruptly. Andrew stepped inside, looking more rattled than I had seen him in years. His tie was slightly crooked, and his expression flickered between confusion and frustration. When he saw me sitting at the table, he stopped in his tracks. "Mom," his voice cracked lightly. "What is going on?" I folded my hands in my lap, keeping my gaze steady. "You were asked to join us. Andrew, please sit." He looked between me and August with disbelief, then walked slowly to the chair opposite mine. A faint flush spread across his cheeks. August sat down as well. "Thank you for coming on short notice. Andrew, I will be direct. There are discrepancies in the way certain financial decisions were reported involving accounts where you are listed as an authorized manager." Andrew stiffened. "If this is about my mother's accounts, I assure you everything is under control." "That is part of the concern," August replied, his tone gentler than his words. "Especially after certain public posts last night raised questions about external influence on your judgment." Andrew swallowed. "Public posts." "The photo your wife posted," I said quietly. Color drained from his face. "Mom, that was nothing. It was a family dinner. A dinner on my birthday. A dinner I was deliberately excluded from. A dinner where I was blocked from seeing the photo until it was conveniently time to display it." His eyes fell to the table. August continued. "The bank must take these issues seriously. Your role requires absolute integrity. We need to ensure that your personal relationships are not compromising your professional obligations." I watched Andrew's shoulders tighten. For a moment, he looked like a boy again, caught in a mistake he never intended to make but could not escape from either. "What does this mean for me?" he asked quietly. "It means," August said, choosing his words with precision, "that your access to your mother's accounts has been suspended pending review. It also means we will evaluate whether recent transactions were influenced by parties outside your fiduciary responsibilities." Andrew's breath hitched, suspended. "You cannot do that. I have approvals set for the next quarter." "No," I said firmly, "you had approvals. They are no longer valid. Those accounts do not belong to you. Andrew, they never have." He stared at me, stunned. I could see the realization building behind his eyes, brick by brick, forming the truth he should have understood long ago. "Mom, why are you doing this?" My voice trembled, not from fear, but from finally speaking what needed to be said. "Because you let them push you. Because you let others tell you who to love and who to distance yourself from. Because you allowed my presence to become an inconvenience." His jaw tightened. "That is not fair." "Perhaps, but it is true." August leaned back slightly, giving us space. He did not interrupt. Andrew rubbed his forehead. "I never meant to hurt you." "Intentions do not erase actions," I said softly. The room fell quiet. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of air through the vents. Outside, cars wove through traffic, unaware of the unraveling happening several stories above. Andrew finally looked up. "What happens now?" Before I could answer, August spoke. "Now we begin a formal review. Your position here is not in immediate danger, but your transparency will matter greatly in the next few weeks." Andrew nodded faintly, absorbing the weight of those words. I opened the folder in front of me. "There are changes being made to my estate. You will be informed when it is appropriate. But understand this, Andrew, I am not doing this to punish you. I am doing this because I refuse to disappear quietly from my own life." He shut his eyes for a moment, as if bracing himself. When he opened them again, I saw something shift behind them. Not acceptance, not yet, but recognition, a tiny start. We sat there in silence, the three of us, suspended in a moment that was neither ending nor beginning, but something in between. Then August stood. "That will be all for today." Andrew rose slowly, nodded to him, then glanced at me with a look I could not fully read. Pain, regret, maybe something else. He left the room. I remained seated, my hands resting on the folder, feeling the room settle back into stillness around me. The thin afternoon light pressed gently against the glass wall, softening the edges of everything. August gave me a small nod of reassurance before leaving as well. I stayed there alone for another minute, gathering myself. The path forward was already unwinding before me, step by step, and there was no turning back now. I walked out of the conference room slowly, giving myself a moment to breathe before stepping back into the hallway. The carpeted floor felt steady beneath my feet, even though my thoughts were anything but. I could still feel the tension that had clung to the room long after Andrew left. A heaviness born from truths spoken too plainly to be ignored anymore. I pressed a hand to my chest, letting the rhythm of my heartbeat calm itself, then started toward the elevator. The ride down was quiet. My reflection stared back at me from the metal panel, and for the first time in a long while I saw a woman who was not simply hoping to be valued, but one who had learned to claim her own worth. When the doors opened, I stepped into the main lobby where everything felt too bright, too open, too fast. Outside, the sky had shifted into a shade of pale gray, a thin cloud cover softening the late afternoon light. I walked to the curb and called a car. As I waited, people rushed past with the hurried pace of those who had somewhere important to be. I wondered how many of them had sat in rooms like the one I had just left, facing choices that forced them to see loved ones differently. My car arrived within minutes. I climbed inside and let the door close behind me as the driver asked where I wanted to go. Home, please. He nodded and merged into traffic. Halfway through the ride, my phone buzzed, a message from a number I did not recognize at first. When I opened it, my breath hitched. It was a screenshot, a group text thread, names I knew too well, Haley, Marjorie, two women from their neighborhood circle, and Lily in the background of the screenshot, her profile picture visible as the one who forwarded it to me. I opened the image. Marjorie had written a long message in the chat. We need to make sure Andrew stays focused on our side. His mother is too attached and emotionally unstable. She will not understand what it means to step back. If she keeps interfering, we will lose control of the long-term plan. Haley had replied with, yes. He cannot keep running to her every time she wants attention. We need him fully invested in this family. They had written those words at 8:30 the night before. During the birthday dinner I had not been invited to. My hands went cold. I scrolled further. Another message appeared. Marjorie again. We did the right thing blocking her and keeping Andrew home tonight. He needs to learn priorities. Blocking me, keeping him home, teaching him priorities. I closed my eyes and let the truth settle. They had not simply influenced him. They had tried to claim ownership of him. They had spoken about me like I was an obstacle to be managed, not a mother to be respected. Another message followed, from Lily this time. Grandma, I know you saw the screenshot. I did not want to send it, but you deserve to know what is happening. My heart ached with love and sadness at once. She was just a child, yet the only one brave enough to show me the truth. The driver slowed as we approached a light, and I looked out the window at the passing shops and restaurants. People were laughing at outdoor tables, sharing drinks and stories. They seemed to belong to a world I had never been more distant from. When I arrived home, I thanked the driver and walked slowly toward the entrance. Richard was gone for the day, and the lobby was empty. The quiet felt heavier now, echoing with everything I had read in that screenshot. Upstairs in my apartment, I set my purse down, opened the curtains, and let the muted light fill the room. Then I sat at my desk and took out my laptop again. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment, almost trembling. I opened my banking console and scanned the newly updated permissions. August had been swift. Andrew was fully suspended. Access logs were locked. Notifications rerouted solely to me. Everything was clean, protected, secure. Good. I clicked my email next. A message from August waited at the top of the inbox. He had attached a document confirming the removal of Andrew's authority to approve or initiate any transactions. Another note from the legal department confirmed the start of an internal review on managerial ethics and conflict of interest. The consequences were unfolding faster than even I had anticipated. I leaned back and rubbed my temples. This was not how I imagined my life in my late 60s. I had pictured quiet mornings, dinners with family, maybe teaching Lily how to cook something her mother never had time for. I had not imagined legal clauses, financial protections, and strategic conversations about the people who should have cared for me most. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Lily. "Grandma, something happened at school today. Mom was yelling at Dad over the phone. She said you ruined everything. Dad looked like he was going to cry. I am scared." The words pierced me. Whatever anger I held toward Andrew, I never wanted Lily caught in the crossfire. I wrote back gently, "I am so sorry you had to see that. None of this is your fault. I love you, and I am proud of you." A few minutes later, she responded, "I love you too. Please be careful." Her warning lingered in my thoughts. Evening settled slowly over the neighborhood. I made tea and sat at the small kitchen table while the kettle cooled, but the warmth of the cup did little to soothe the tightness in my chest. Somewhere in the city, Andrew was spiraling, and somewhere else, Marjorie was likely filling Haley with self-righteous fury. I tried to steady myself by focusing on the practical next steps. Tomorrow, the estate restructuring would continue. Soon, the educational trust for Lily would be established. My own accounts would shift into formats even harder to access without my approval. Thomas had left me tools. Now I was learning how to use them. But the emotional cost sat heavily on my shoulders. I stood and walked to the living room, lifting the photo frame of Thomas from the coffee table. His smile steadied me, the way it had always done. I imagined what he might say. Probably something like, "You are stronger than they think. You always have been. And maybe you cannot protect Andrew from consequences he created." I placed the photo back gently. Just as I was turning toward the hallway, my phone rang. Not a message this time, a call. It was Haley. The sound of her name on my screen sent a chill through me. I hesitated only a moment before declining the call, but a second later she tried again and again. By the third attempt, I silenced the phone without answering. I walked toward the window, watching the last hints of daylight fade behind the trees. Voices drifted from the sidewalk below. Somewhere a dog barked. My world felt strangely split between the ordinary and the unraveling. When the phone finally stopped buzzing, a new notification appeared. A voicemail. I did not play it. I was not ready to hear whatever she had to say, whatever blame she intended to throw at me. Instead, I stood there in the stillness of the room, letting the silence settle like a blanket. Everything that had been set in motion today was out in the open now. The lies, the manipulation, the long-concealed intentions. And tomorrow, the consequences would deepen. Rain had begun to fall sometime after dusk, soft at first and then harder, tapping steadily against the windows like fingertips urging me to pay attention. I stood in the dim light of the living room, the only illumination coming from the small lamp near the bookshelf. The voicemail from Haley still sat unheard in my phone, a small circle of tension I refused to touch. I told myself I would listen when I was ready, but even thinking about her voice made my stomach twist. Outside, a clap of thunder rolled over Lake Washington, low and heavy. The power flickered once before steadying again. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and walked to the kitchen to warm some water for tea. The quiet routine should have soothed me, but my mind remained restless. tracing every word from the screenshot Lily had sent, every expression on Andrew's face at the bank, every moment of the dinner I had watched from the doorway. When the kettle clicked off, I poured the hot water into a mug and carried it with me toward the living room. I had barely taken a sip when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me so much the tea sloshed over the rim. I set the mug down quickly and stared toward the front door. The bell rang again, more urgent this time. My heart thudded uncomfortably as I approached. Through the peephole, I saw a figure soaked from the rain, shoulders slumped, hair plastered to his forehead. Andrew? I hesitated only a second before unlocking the door. He stumbled inside without waiting for an invitation, water dripping from his coat onto the hardwood floor. He looked older somehow, or maybe just worn down in ways he could no longer hide. For a moment, he simply stood there, breathing hard, as if trying to gather himself before speaking. I closed the door behind him. Andrew, what are you doing out in weather like this? He ran a hand through his wet hair. I needed to talk to you. Mom, I could not wait. I crossed my arms, not out of anger, but to steady myself. You should have called first. I would have let you come in when you were calm. He let out a strained laugh. Calm. I do not even know what that feels like anymore. His voice cracked on the last word, and I felt my resentment soften just slightly, but I held my posture. Sit down, Andrew, you are soaked. He moved to the couch and lowered himself onto it, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands for a moment. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red around the edges. Mom, everything is falling apart. My cards are frozen. My authorizations are gone. HR pulled me from 2 meetings today. They said there is a conflict of interest investigation. He rubbed his forehead again. And Haley is furious. She says you are trying to destroy us. I stayed silent for a moment, letting him speak without interruption. He lifted his head. Why did you do this? Why did you make everything so public? I sat down in the chair across from him and folded my hands in my lap. Nothing I did was public. Andrew, it only feels that way because you never expected consequences. He blinked hard. That is not fair. Maybe not, I answered softly, but it is true. He opened his mouth again, then closed it. Finally, he looked straight at me, and for the first time since he walked in, I saw fear in his eyes, not anger, not resentment, fear. Mom, I do not know how to fix this. I leaned forward a little. You start by telling me the truth, the whole truth. No lies, no excuses, no protecting anyone but yourself. He was quiet for a long moment. The rain hit the windows harder, a restless rhythm filling the silence. Finally, he exhaled as if releasing something heavy. Haley and her mother did not want me to leave last night. They knew it was your birthday, but they said it was not my responsibility anymore. They said we needed to focus on our own family. He rubbed his temples. When I tried to push back, Haley accused me of being weak. She said I was choosing you over her. My breath caught, and you believed her. I did not want to fight, he said quietly. I wanted peace. I never imagined it would lead to this. I studied his face. He looked less like the confident bank manager he presented to the world, and more like the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, trusting I could fix anything. But I could not fix this for him. Not anymore. Then he continued. There is more. They told me I should not let you control so much money at your age. They said it was irresponsible of me to let you stay so involved. They said you were getting forgetful. A sharp ache tightened in my chest. Forgetful, irresponsible, words that stung more deeply than I expected. Andrew looked up at me. I swear I did not agree with them. Not completely. I just did not argue hard enough. And now everything is falling apart. I sat back, letting his words settle between us. You let them shape your voice, I said quietly. You let them shape your choices. And then you let them shape how you treated me. His eyes filled again. I know. I know, Mom, and I am sorry. But please, help me understand how to fix this. I am on probation at work. HR said my leadership integrity is being reviewed. They said it is about personal influences affecting my decisions. That is because of you. Mom, I did not flinch. No, Andrew, that is because of you. Because you made choices that blurred lines you should have respected. Because you let people manipulate you into believing I was a burden instead of your mother. His shoulders sagged. He looked defeated. I reached for the folder on the table beside me and slid it toward him. These are the documents for the new arrangement. They explain what is being transferred, what is being protected, and what you will receive for now. He looked at the folder but did not touch it. Haley is not going to accept this. She already threatened to move out today. She said if you keep taking things away, we will not have stability. Stability is not the same as dependency, I said. He shook his head. I do not want to lose everything. My job, my marriage, my daughter, any of it. I leaned forward again, my voice gentle but firm. You may lose your marriage. Andrew, I will not lie to you about that. But Lily will never leave you, and your job can be saved if you show them you can course correct. What you cannot do is keep living under their control. Not anymore. He swallowed hard and closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling with slow breaths. Then he whispered something I had not expected to hear. I hate the way they talk about you. I hate the way they push me. But I was afraid of being alone. His voice cracked on the last word. I felt something inside me break open, not in pain, but in recognition. Loneliness makes people cling to the wrong anchors, even grown men, even successful ones. Andrew looked up again. I do not know how to climb out of this hole without you. You will, I said softly, but not by leaning on me. Not this time. You have to stand on your own, and you have to earn back trust one step at a time. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight and truth of that. After a long pause, he asked quietly what happens now. There was no anger in his voice anymore, only a kind of surrender mixed with hope. We talk again tomorrow, I said, after you have had time to think without anyone whispering in your ear. Tonight, go home. Be honest with Lily, and do not let Haley speak for you. He nodded again, then stood to leave. For a moment, he hesitated near the door, as if deciding whether to hug me or apologize again. In the end, he simply whispered goodnight and walked out into the rain. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, letting the cool wood steady my spine. The apartment was quiet again, but it did not feel empty. Something had shifted tonight, and for the first time since this began, I felt the smallest hint of something I had not let myself feel. Possibility. Possibility was a fragile thing, but it stayed with me through the night like a small, steady light. I moved through the rest of the evening quietly, wiping the kitchen counter, turning off lamps, folding the blanket on the couch. Small actions gave my mind space to settle. When I finally lay down, the rain was easing, and the soft rhythm against the window lulled me into a sleep that was more peaceful than I expected. The next morning brought a sky washed clean, pale blue with soft sunlight that filtered gently through my curtains. I sat on the balcony with a cup of strong black coffee, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. The apartment building across the street glittered in the early light. Birds hopped along the railing, curious but cautious. For the first time in days, my heart felt still. The quiet did not last long. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with updates. One was from the legal team, confirming that the restructuring paperwork was officially in motion. Another from August letting me know that Andrew had been reassigned temporarily to a lower-risk department while the bank reviewed the situation. It was not a demotion in title, but anyone who understood corporate culture would know what it meant. a chance to restore trust, or a warning of what could come if he did not. I set the phone aside, exhaling slowly. The consequences had begun. They were not mine to shoulder. They were his. 2 days passed like that, with steady steps forward. Haley did not call again. I saw no new messages from her. The silence was its own kind of answer. Lily wrote to me in small, gentle notes. She said both her parents were arguing behind closed doors. She said her mother blamed me and her father for everything. She said her father looked tired but calmer, as if a weight had fallen away even if he did not yet understand how to live without it. On the third evening after our conversation, Andrew showed up at my door again. This time he knocked softly and waited. When I opened the door, he looked healthier, still tired, but centered somehow. "May I come in?" he asked. Of course. He stepped inside, wiping his shoes on the mat. There was a nervous energy in him I recognized from his childhood, the kind he carried when he had done something brave but was not sure what came next. I talked to HR. He said, as he sat down on the couch, they want transparency, so I told them everything that involved my access to your accounts. I did not hide anything, and I told them I needed to earn back their trust. I nodded. That was the right thing to do. And I talked to Haley. Those words tightened something in me. How did she take it? He let out a small, humorless laugh. Not well. She said I embarrassed her. She said I humiliated her in front of her mother. She said you manipulated me. Did you believe that? I asked quietly. He looked down at his hands. No, not anymore. I see things more clearly now. She wanted control, not partnership, and I let her have it for too long. There was a stillness between us then, a small crack in the world I had known, an opening where growth might settle if nurtured. What happens next? I asked gently. He ran a hand through his hair. I do not know. She has moved back in with her mother for now. She took some things with her. She told me she wants time to think. Thinking was not her strength, I said softly before I could stop myself. He gave a small, tired smile. No, it never was. But maybe time apart will make her see what she never wanted to. And you? I asked. What do you want? His shoulders sagged for a moment before he sat up straighter. I want to do better. Not just for work. Not just for Lily. For you. For myself. I let people shape me into a man I do not like. That stops now. There was a tremor in my chest, not painful, but warm. When he looked at me, I saw a softness I had not seen in years. Mom, I am sorry for how I treated you, for letting others tell me who you were, for choosing silence when I should have stood beside you. My eyes burned, but I held his gaze. Apologies matter only when followed by actions. Let us see what the next year brings. He nodded. Then, with a tentative motion, he reached out and squeezed my hand. It was not a full embrace, not a flood of emotion. It was something small and earnest and real. After he left, I felt a shift inside me again. Not triumph, not revenge, something quieter, something like healing. Time moved on. Spring softened into summer. The restructuring of my estate finalized without issue. Lily's educational trust was established exactly as planned, and she visited me often, bringing stories from school and quiet questions about her parents that I answered as gently as possible. She grew more confident with each visit, more sure that she had a place in my life that would never be taken from her. Andrew continued working in his reassigned department, and slowly, he earned back some of the respect he had lost. His supervisors noted improvements in his leadership style, his transparency, his willingness to accept responsibility. He did not speak often of Haley, except to say that they were discussing options but not rushing toward anything final. He seemed lighter somehow, less pulled, more grounded. Then, as summer edged toward fall, something unexpected happened. He made a reservation at a small Italian restaurant on the east side and asked if I would join him and Lily for dinner. Just us, he said. No one else. It was the first time in years he had made such a gesture without pressure or guilt wrapped around it. I said yes. When the night came, I wore a simple cream blouse and a gold necklace Thomas had given me decades ago. Lily hugged me the moment I stepped inside the restaurant. Andrew did too, though more gently, as if learning how to show affection again. We talked for 2 hours, about her school, about his work, about my garden. The conversation flowed without tension, without hidden jabs or buried resentments. When the check arrived, Andrew insisted on paying. It was symbolic but meaningful. After dinner, we walked outside, and the evening air was cool with the smell of pine from the lakeside. Andrew reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I want you to have this, he said. Inside was a photograph. A new one? Me in the center, Lily leaning her head against my shoulder, Andrew beside us, smiling not for the camera, but in a way that seemed to come from something real. A real family picture, the kind I had wished for without ever saying out loud. My throat tightened as I looked at it. He watched my reaction carefully, almost nervously. I want this to be the start of something better, he said. Not perfect, just better. I ran my thumb gently over the glossy surface of the photo. The moonlight caught the edges, making the image almost glow. Thank you, I whispered. A year had changed so much. Some losses still lingered. Some scars would never fully vanish. But something had shifted inside all of us. Something had been rebuilt. Healing is not loud. It is not dramatic. It grows slowly in the spaces where honesty finally has room to live. As we parted that evening, Andrew hugged me again, longer this time. And when I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had in a long while. When I arrived home, I placed the new photograph beside the older ones on my shelf, a reminder that life does not move in straight lines. It bends, it bruises, it breaks, but sometimes, if you choose yourself, it begins again. If you have ever lived through a moment where you had to reclaim your worth or rebuild your place in your own family, I hope you will share your story with me in the comments. And if this journey touched something in you, feel free to stay on the channel. More stories like this are waiting for you. Stories of women finding their strength again in all the ways that matter.